Okay, we know from the reading we've done in the text for this course that modeling is one of the best instructional practices we can do. So with that in mind, I'm going to model for you this evening how to select a standard and then how to break that standard into learning targets and write essential questions. For your literacy components project, one of the things that you're going to need to do, in addition to selecting the standards that fit with your unit for your content area, you're going to need to select standards from the Minnesota ELA standards, which will be your literacy standards. When you go to this link, you'll find a PDF with the standards, and then on pages 80 to 87, you're going to find the standards for literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects, which is considered literacy in the content areas. So for modeling purposes tonight, I selected standard 9.12.6.6 for reading in history and social studies. What that looks like in the actual PDF standards, there's the reading benchmarks for literacy and social studies. And you can see grades 9 to 10 students. You can see the first number is 9 for 9th grade. And then if you look down here under craft and structure, 9.12.6.6, there's our standard. Compare the point of view of 2 or more authors or creators for how they create the same or similar topics, including which details they include and emphasize or exclude in their respective accounts, including points of view about a Minnesota American Indian history. Quite a mouthful. So if we go back to where I have this standard, your first step then is to break down the standard into learning targets using I can statements. So with that in mind, I have these bullet points that would begin with I can for students. I can identify an author's point of view. I can analyze an author's point of view to determine claims, opinions, beliefs. I can identify and explain details relevant to a particular author's point of view. I can compare 2 or more authors' points of view to determine the ways in which they are similar and the ways in which they are different. So those are the learning targets that we have established with this standard here. And you can see how it is really important to break down those standards into smaller, manageable learning targets for students. Not only does that help you focus your instruction and make sure that you're meeting those targets, but it helps students be aware of how they're doing in the progression toward meeting the learning targets. Next, after you have your learning targets, you're going to write essential questions. Essential questions for a unit should be open-ended, intriguing, and not easily answered. However, essential questions for a lesson are the learning targets converted into a question. So taking the learning targets that we had, we can change them into a question by adding how can I, so that it's rephrased, how can I identify an author's point of view? How can I analyze an author's point of view to determine his or her claims, opinions, and beliefs? How can I identify details relevant to a particular author's point of view? And then in what ways are 2 authors' point of view similar, and in what ways are they different? Let's practice. Next, we have this standard, which is also a reading standard for science and technical subjects. It says compare and contrast findings presented in a text to those from other sources, including their own experiments, noting when the findings support or contradict previous explanations or accounts. You'll see that I've highlighted in bold in blue font some words. Compare and contrast is the function. That is what you want students to do. So when we're thinking about academic language, that's important to pay attention to. We're breaking down the standard into learning targets, beginning with I can statements. I can compare and contrast findings presented in a text to those of other sources. I can create a written lab report of my findings from an experiment. I can summarize whether a text supports or contradicts a previous finding or account. Then you're going to write your essential questions. You can do that by turning these learning targets into a question. How can I compare and contrast findings presented in a text to those of other sources? How can I create a written lab report of my findings from an experiment? How can I summarize whether a text supports or contradicts a previous finding or account? This modeling should help you